Want me to call the meeting to order or get going?
Sure. Yeah, we'll carry on and hope they can join soon.
Help me along here, but I guess first order of business is approved minutes from the last meeting. Did everybody review the minutes, get to take a look at that? And do we have a motion to approve the minutes?
Can make a motion.
A second?
Second.
Any additions, objections with the minutes? Let's say we're good there. I guess we are going to just continue to talk about capture rate studies through this meeting. Wait, hang on.
That is the plan. Let's see. Okay, there's Charlotte. Welcome. And like I had mentioned to Charlotte, our little approving of minutes doesn't take long at all. So, so we're done with that. Charlotte, do you want to try? Oh, okay. She's chatting that she's trying to get audio. No, not everybody uses the same platform, so sometimes it takes a minute to get acclimated. And we also have Asami from the Recycling Partnership. So those are our two guests that'll do that for, that's the one real item on the agenda, Adam, is just this presentation and discussion with them from the Recycling Partnership. So hopefully they can get everything working. Asami, we can see you now. Can you hear us? Oh, can't hear you though.
You hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, great. This is the opposite of the problem we had yesterday, right? When I couldn't hear Karen and Pete.
Yeah, I know we're all better now, but of course it's probably just from switching the different platforms that we use.
Right. Sorry about the delay.
It's okay.
I just lost power and I think it fried my modem.
Can you hear me, Karen?
We hear you, Charlotte, but there is an echo.
I had to call in by phone.
Okay. You can hear us though?
Yeah.
Okay, we can hear you, so that's fine. I know sometimes I have issues where I just have to go to the audio thing and test it, and once I test it, it works. I don't know. It makes no sense.
Yeah. I tried my normal go-tos of switching my audio on my computer and it just didn't seem to work.
Okay. All right. Well, welcome to our Waste District Advisory Committee's subcommittee that is focusing on different parts of our 5-year plan that involve contracts. So as Asami and Charlotte know, we're discussing writing an RFP to be able to perform a big capture rate study here in Louisville. So they're here to give us some more expertise on what that means and some background info from experience and hopefully help us through this process a little bit. Does one of you want to start? or do you have any questions for us first? I don't know.
No, I think we have a presentation prepared. I'm assuming Asami looks like she's trying to share it.
Okay.
I'm working on it. Sorry.
And if you don't have access, I can change permissions. I'm making you a presenter.
Okay. Let's see. Seeing a presentation now.
Yes, we see that.
Okay, great. And Karen, you're all set with everything you need to do?
Yep.
Okay,
Good to go.
awesome. Great. So I think Karen already introduced us, but my name is Asami Kenny-Meadow. I oversee the recycling partnerships effort to collect household generation and capture data. So I'm here to help teach you more about the capture studies and answer any questions you might have. And Charlotte, did you want to say anything before we start?
Hi, I'm Charlotte Pitt, and I'm here really just to support Asami with her presentation, talk a little bit about some experiences that I had doing capture studies prior to joining the partnership.
Great. Thank you. So here's just a brief agenda. We just did a quick intro, but Charlotte and I will talk about what a capture study is, what you get out of it, and how it works generally. And I don't know that we'll necessarily go exactly in this order, but we're hoping we can help answer any questions you might have and assist in your discussions for next steps. So Karen, I forgot to ask, is everyone already familiar with the partnership? If not, I could just do a brief intro.
I believe everyone is familiar either in capacity through their own jobs or through us talking about it at these meetings. But if you want to give kind of a brief overview of what the partnership does, that would be fine.
Sure, great. So we are a national nonprofit, 501c3. We work across the recycling system to help residents recycle and recycle well. And we do this by increasing access to recycling, increasing capture of recyclables, and by improving the quality of recyclables that are collected. We know that about 40 million homes in the US can't recycle at home as easily as they can throw something away. So they might have garbage collected from the curb, but not recycling. So and those that can recycle, have curbside recycling service, and are using the service are still putting 40% of their recyclables in the garbage. So there's a lot of opportunity to change behavior as well. And our core work is working with communities to improve residential traditional recycling of paper, plastics, metals, and glass. And we give out grant funding for recycling cards and for education. And we also help implement best practices on a wider scale by partnering with regions and states across the US. And sometimes we do capture studies with our grantees. Sometimes, like in the case of Louisville, jurisdictions do their own studies. And we either partner with them in the planning and then they share the results with us, or we find their data published publicly later on. And we've collected over 65 data points in the last about 6 years from across the US. I don't know of any other entities who have this type of data. And we use this insights from the capture studies to help us look at how recycling is performing all the way from like the jurisdiction level all the way up to the national level. So why would you care about a capture study? Well, Karen told me it's in the 5-year plan, so it's important. But it's really such a wealth of information to help you evaluate the program's performance. So very broadly speaking, you have a garbage cart and a recycling cart. You may have other carts, but let's just focus on those two. And inevitably, you have some recyclables in the garbage cart, some garbage in the recycling cart. And so, you know, really what's in those carts? Is it cans, cardboard boxes, bottles, diapers? How much of those materials is in each of those carts? Are some materials recycled more than others? You know, for example, how much recyclable cans does the household generate, and how much of that is ending up in the recycling cart? These are the insights you get from a capture study, and it can really help target your messaging to the residents. And also by measuring before and after you message, you can see how effective that messaging was. So I know Louisville has done a waste characterization study as part of the 10-year study. And a waste characterization study gives you, the composition of the collected garbage stream. You can identify the top materials disposed, your strategies to meet your waste reduction goals, and quantify the recyclables that are thrown out in the garbage, and target your education based on that. Many jurisdictions also do an inbound MRF audit. So that's the composition of the recycling stream that's going to the MRF as opposed to what's coming out of the MRF. So here you can calculate the contamination rate of your recycling stream, identify your top contaminants, and customize your education material to control contamination. You can also quantify the total value of the materials that are collected to verify, if you had fee increases or penalties from the MRF. I don't know if that exists in Louisville, but you can do calculations like that as well. And if you have one or the other, that's a good first step, but you don't get the full story. But when you pair waste and recycling composition and you apply the tons and the households that are in that program, you can understand what a household generates and how much of recyclables are captured in the recycling stream, which is what we call a capture study. So this takes your understanding of a program to the next level. And you can add other streams like yard waste as well if you also want to evaluate that. Charlotte, and I think I want to hand it over to you to add your experience with it.
Yeah, and if you could just drive the presentation, that would be
Yeah.
great. So, as we look at curbside programs across the country and looking at access, we've definitely been able to learn a little bit over the last, 8 years about what sort of service actually generates more materials on a per household basis. That's looking at pounds per household. And this is just a fairly generic overview that we believe that most households generate somewhere between 750 and 800 pounds of recyclables each year. But we know that we don't capture all of those recyclables. And depending on the systems in place, whether it's a drop-off, whether it's an opt-in curbside, whether it's curbside with bins or curbside with carts, we know that there are varying levels of increased capture as you move through that chain, with obviously curbside and carts with excellent education being the sort of the premium of the service levels. So I just wanted to share with you, prior to coming to the partnership, I have a 22-year background with the City and County of Denver running their solid waste operations. And I did a capture rate study actually in 2017 with the Recycling Partnership. And Asami, if you want to switch the slide, found it incredibly useful because we had what we thought was a high-performing program at the time. And what we learned after doing what was basically, they're called like household burritos. You basically go and you get the trash cart and the recycling cart from each house. and then you measure what recyclables are still in the trash can. And we found that in Denver, we were only capturing 63% of the available recyclables from the average household. So we were basically losing, a fairly significant portion. So we started to, look at, okay, let's look at what materials we're losing, because we really wanted to drive our education messaging. And if you could go to the next slide, Asami, we had made the assumption that we were probably losing a significant amount of cardboard just because it's bulky and people don't like to cut it down to fit into a cart. But what we found actually was we were still losing a considerable amount of cans. So digging into what's happening at a household level really does take your waste composition to sort of the next level of awareness of how to message to your community and how to really look at differing neighborhoods. I didn't share all of the data that we did by neighborhood, but we were able to really target some education messaging, and we actually used the capture rate study to justify some increased education budget through our general fund process. So having this information really is an incredible value to a community. With that, I'll turn it back to Asami.
Great, thank you. So you can get capture generation and capture data in a couple of different ways. And so I want to kind of go over the different ways you can do the field work and kind of walk through what is required to plan a capture study. So the two different ways you can sample for a capture study is to take samples from what was collected in the route, which is called back of truck sampling, or you can collect what a resident set out on the curb, which is called cart-based sampling or participant sampling. Back of truck sampling is probably a pretty common method for doing a waste characterization study or inbound MRF audit. The collection trucks run their normal route. They bring the materials to a location where they can dump the whole load, which is usually their regular destination, like the landfill, transfer station, or the MRF. And then, but you'll have to coordinate with the hauler to make sure the correct route is being dumped at the location you want to do your sampling. And then a loader comes in and takes some scoops out of the pile, and then you sort what you collected from there. And you do this for the garbage and the recycling routes from the same area to see, to get the overall picture of what a household is generating from that route or from that neighborhood. And households on a route, all the households are counted. So you may have some people who are only setting out their garbage carts and not participating in recycling. So you get a bigger picture. And that's why we also call it the whole city capture rate. If you want to know more about individual household behavior, you do a cart-based sampling. A collection crew, which in this case is usually the consultant, empties the entire content of a cart that is on the curb directly into a tarp, and they wrap it and take it back to a place where they can sort it. So some people call this the burrito method because of all the bundles of samples you get. The collection crew is only targeting households that have both set out of recycling and garbage. And if you're looking at also yard waste, you might want to target those that have all three set out. And you can keep each household's recycling and garbage separate. So if you go to 10 houses, you end up with 20 bundles. Or you can choose to batch households together. For example, each bundle might represent 5 households. Either way, you're getting information about what a recycling participant is doing. And you can see if you have any education or any intervention targeted towards people who are actually recycling, you can see how your intervention affected their behavior. And when you keep each household separate, then you can really get even more information, like what percent of the households had, let's say, 0 to 10% contamination versus 10 to 20% contamination. So you can get really cool graphs like that from the consultants. And if you have a consultant do this, you'll still need to coordinate with the haulers so they don't get ahead of the consultants, but the coordination can be a little bit more simple because you don't have to all be in a place where the trucks can dump and sample. The downside is that you may get more questions from residents because people who are not their regular haulers collecting the material. And we can talk more about kind of pros and cons or answer any questions you might have about these, but consultants are really, all the consultants we've worked with are familiar with both methods. So they have their recommended best practices for dealing with any issues that might come up. Here's just another graphic that shows kind of the two sampling methods. Let's say there are 10 households in a curbside collection route. So not all the households are participating in recycling. So let's say 7 of them are participants. And those 7 participants, like Charlotte was talking about, they're only putting 60% of their recyclable materials in the recycling cart. So the back of truck sampling is going to be looking at that whole route. So you have some people who aren't participating, some people who are participating. And then the cart-based sampling is the bottom graphic where you're just looking at the participants and their behaviors. So any questions I can answer right now about these? We can talk more in detail later too. Okay. So, and this is one of the decision points you'll have to make along with the consultants. So I just wanted to make sure you knew about these two sampling methods. So whatever sampling method you go with, once they collect the sample, the consultants are going to be sorting the materials into predetermined material categories. You're going to want to align these categories with your commodity types that the MRFs can market. For example, cardboard, separate from mixed paper, HDPE natural, which is milk jugs, separate from HDPE color, like detergent bottles. And then as well as any contaminants you may want to focus your education on, like plastic bags or food waste. The consultants then weigh each sorted material to figure out the average composition of the recycling or the garbage stream. And then they take the total weight of materials that were collected from the route or from the whole jurisdiction, if that's what you're looking at. And then the households that are served by those areas to calculate pounds per household per year generation and capture rate of that. So you can see some pictures of how materials are sorted and weighed. So that was just a quick overview of what happens in the field and after, but there are a number of things that need to be decided before field work happens. And this is kind of a long list, but, and I can share the slides after we're done so you have all these. But it's really critical to think through all these. And a lot of these things will go into your the RFP language as well. And as specific as you can get, it's going to be easier for the responding consultants to give you a good answer. So, so I'll just go through all these kind of quickly. But goal of the study is absolutely crucial to figuring out how many samples to take, where to take the samples from, how the samples are taken, whether it's back of truck or cart based. This really guides all the other bullets, really. So you want to be as specific as possible about what you want to get out of the study. Is it really, are you just looking at kind of overall performance, or do you really want to target certain places or certain behaviors, certain past performances? And also know what your budget is, at least a range of your budget. Capture studies are very expensive. It's really labor intensive, as you could probably tell from all the sampling and sorting that has to happen. And all the other bullets that you need to decide are going to determine the final cost. But your budget limit may also dictate what you can do. So knowing, what you're comfortable spending for this is going to be really helpful. A 1-week back of the truck sampling capture study could cost at least $50,000 more, depending, if you're doing more complex studies where you want to make sure you get enough data from different neighborhoods or by jurisdiction or by district, then it could cost a lot more. A card-based sampling, recently I've seen about $100,000 or more. So it's not cheap to do these, but the information you get is really great, but you want to think about how you spend your money and how best to spend it. The next 6 or so bullets define the overall scope of the study. Which sectors are you going to look at? Is it single family residential? There's up to 8 units, I think, covered in some of your areas, but are you going to include also commercial? You want to also define your study area. Are you going to look at the whole jurisdiction? Are there priority areas you want to focus on? And the criteria for determining, within your study area, how are you going to look at your routes or trucks to make sure that you're getting a good distribution? The consultants will help think about, demographics, look at past tonnage collected, past contamination information, participation information, whatever data you have is going to be helpful to determine which routes you sample from. And then the specificity of the data required. So if you're just looking at the jurisdiction as an average, maybe you're taking 25 samples from the entire area. But if you want to say compare one area to another, you may want like 25 samples from each of those, so you have a statistically valid number for each of those areas. So the more you want to compare, the more samples are going to have to. And then obviously the streams, I talked about waste and recycling, but are there any other streams you want to add? Sampling method, back of truck or cart base, that is very much defined by what you want to study. But that's something to keep in mind. And then the duration. I understand a lot of your areas every other week recycling. So do you want to sample so that, both weeks of the every other week's collection is covered by the sampling? Do you want to do it in multiple seasons? Sometimes composition of materials change based on seasons. So a lot of jurisdictions want to look at, summer and fall, maybe spring, summer, fall, or just, one season or two. An item that really trips up a lot of studies is where you can sample, store, and store the samples. I've had a lot of studies get canceled because we couldn't find a place to do this. If you are sampling curbside, then the sampling location might not be an issue. But if there are multiple locations, because the trucks can only unload in a certain location, the consultants will probably have to put together multiple teams to be at those locations. And so that affects cost, obviously, but also just logistically, it gets more complex. And, often solid waste permits don't allow you to do everything in one location. So you'll have to think about how that might work for, all the different landfills and transfer stations and MRFs that are serving your community. And this could also influence which routes you end up sampling if you can only, target the areas that a particular hauler collects and brings to a particular site. Then, that might define the area that you get to sample from. And then sort categories. You don't need to have a final category, but it would be nice to have at least an example list in your RFP so that the consultants have an idea of how many different categories they might need to think about. And we also have a standard list of categories that we use for all of our studies. So we're happy to provide that for reference. And then beyond this is decisions that need to be made to prepare for your RFP, I just wanted you to be aware of other responsibilities that Karen, I don't know if this is going to be your responsibility, but whoever's really leading the study is going to have, like, you know, leading the coordination with all the stakeholders so that the planning and the implementation goes smoothly. You could have the consultant discuss logistics with the different stakeholders, but getting their buy-in ahead of time is going to be super critical. And once you select the qualified consultants, they're going to need, you know, historical route information like tonnage collected, household served, other route information you might have to pinpoint like which routes to sample. And then once they're done with the field work, they're going to need up-to-date information so they can do their calculations. And then, as I mentioned before, if you do cart-based sampling, residents may question why someone other than their regular hauler is taking their trash and recycling. So you'll want to provide adequate information to your customer service, public safety, council district rep, anyone that, you know, who might hear from residents ahead of time. So you don't have run into any issues. We don't recommend notifying residents ahead of time, but about the study, because we don't want them to change their behavior. And then, like I said before, the consultants are typically really experienced with this, so they can probably make good recommendations on that. And then lots of coordination with the consultants, reviewing plans and reports. There's more than I always expect. So I just wanted you to be aware of some of these expectations and responsibilities. And it's really good to outline some of these in your RFP as well. So just wanted to go through that. So anything I missed, Charlotte? Nope. Okay. So that was a quick overview of the capture studies. Are there any questions or things you want to discuss further at this time, Karen? And did I miss something you wanted me to talk more about?
Charlotte, this is Brian Slade. I'm just curious, which method did you use in the Denver study?
We use the box truck with the household capture. So we captured it on a household level and basically kept each household's waste separated so we could actually measure per household the recycling and the trash.
How many houses were included in your study?
Gosh, I think
Just
we
approximately.
did about 4,700.
Okay.
I think was the number. So it was quite a few, and we selected various areas of town. We wanted to get a good cross section of the different styles of neighborhoods.
What was the total budget amount that ended up at the end of the day?
I think we were close to 70,000.
Okay. Thank you.
Things have definitely gotten a lot more expensive since then, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I will let y'all know, though, I was successful at taking my capture study to our Denver City Council and getting $700,000 that year budgeted towards education and outreach. So it was, for having that data was hugely valuable in justifying additional investments in the services.
And one final question. From the time you began your research to the time you completed the project, just out of curiosity, what period of time was that? How long?
Oh, the capture rate, it probably took a couple of months between contracting, you know, with the provider, you know, selecting the neighborhoods, actually finding sort locations, getting the consultants in town. I mean, you're going to be starting with a fresh RFP, so I would add more time. I think probably 6 months.
It typically
Sure.
takes a consultant about 2 months to do the actual planning for the, you know, detailed planning of what they're going to do. So, you know, after your RFP process and the selection of the consultant and getting them on board, and there'll definitely be a couple months of planning in addition to that.
Charlotte, if I could, what was the impact of the data that you were able to collect? How was you able to use it and make a difference with it?
Sure. We were able to use it in a couple of ways. I just mentioned we were able to take it to City Council to increase our education budget allocation. We were able to solidify justifying the distribution of universal carts. We had an opt-in program for a long time, and we were up at, I think, somewhere around 83% participation, and we were able to just get ourselves over the hump. And that capture data actually went on to help us justify most recently the implementation of pay-as-you-throw too. Understanding what was in household garbage. We've since done some additional composition studies, but having data really helps with, in my mind, education and policy. Did that help?
Yes.
Do you all have any experience working on brand audits? I know that there's some citizen science around it, but it's a practice that involves figuring out where the single-use packaging is even coming from in a lot of cases. And I know that there's some global studies that say that it's Coca-Cola, PepsiCo, and Nestle for the most part, but I feel like that would be really interesting to try to push the pressure further up the supply chain and help with some of our waste reduction efforts. I think citizens would be really interested in that, and the city may also be interested in getting involved with that if we, I think it's just eye-opening to see that maybe there's some people that aren't part of the conversation that should be.
We don't, for the partnership studies, we don't typically do that. We're typically focusing on different MRF marketable commodities. But I know we've definitely drilled down a little bit deeper into looking at certain products like, like a coffee pod, which typically, goes back to a particular brand, or I think there was a study where we were looking at like different cans, which included like cat food cans. So we've done, you can definitely subdivide your categories so that you drill down, initially the consultants will separate it into, let's say, PET bottles, but then from there they can look at it and separate that into different types of bottles or different, products, if that's something that you're really interested in.
Sumeda, that would be interesting to use as a product ban, like styrofoam, to be able to use that to see how that's being processed circularly or, not. So.
Yeah, it sounds like it might add more cost because we're getting even more detail oriented,
Right.
but it might be a good one-time thing to do if we can afford it.
Right. I think so too. It'd be a good support. Yeah. Right.
If I could, I want to thank Charlotte and Asami for coming. I think the presentation was excellent. I unfortunately have to leave to go to another meeting. But I just wanted to say that I thought the presentation was very informative, and thank you so much.
Thanks, Pete. I have a question. Do they typically look at the composition of the trash portion? Is that like we see the chart of all the recyclables and how much of that is actually captured, but is the trash typically separated maybe with like organic waste or styrofoam or whatever?
Yeah, definitely. We typically have a set of recyclable commodities, but also, a lot of times what would be considered contaminants if it's in the recycling stream. So they might be food waste, yard waste. We typically have a section that's like household hazardous waste, batteries, sharps, C&D waste, tanglers in the recycling stream, bagged materials in the recycling stream. And then any others that you're really interested in. Some jurisdictions are really interested in diapers, for example, so we have that category. And if there are things you think you might want to educate people on, but want a little bit more information on, then that might be a category you add.
Okay, and that's being specifically looked at out of the recycling.
Both
Both
streams. If you're
streams,
looking
though.
at
Okay.
waste and recycling,
Okay,
but you
this is-
can also, if you don't care too much about what's in the waste, then you can ask the consultants to look at the recycling, and that might be a cost saving, but typically it's good to look at both so you know what's in both.
And then how much time is usually between like a before and after? Like in Denver, have they already done another one yet to show any progress?
Denver's
Yeah,
done a
I mean,
bunch.
We've there were a ton of waste studies, but yes, there was before and after. There was targeted before and after. The first intervention, really saw a good results around increased capture and decreased contamination. We did a second project that was a deeper dive into different neighborhoods, which saw decent results, but not as good as the first time. So I think it depends how long you want to spend with an education and outreach program before you do, and if there's some seasonal considerations to when you remeasure.
Okay, thanks.
I think a lot of times our interventions we do for about 6 weeks, 4 to 6 weeks, is ballpark. But if you can do longer campaigns, then that's great too. And then we avoid time between Thanksgiving through kind of beginning of January. So we don't have the holiday waste affect our studies.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Charlotte, how broad or narrow was your goal? You mentioned, Sam, you mentioned the goal being really critical. How did you determine that goal? And give me an example of what your goal was when you started.
Yeah, so I think I mentioned our goal was really to figure out what materials we were missing from the household. We suspected we were missing cardboard when in fact we weren't. So we were definitely trying.
By missing, you're talking about missing in the recycling carts or bins. Okay.
Yes, we thought we were picking a large amount of cardboard up in our bulky waste collection and in our trash carts. And it turns out that we weren't necessarily, but we were looking to get away from, hey, recycling is great messaging to, hey, look, we need more of this material. We had started to dabble with that messaging prior to the capture study. We were like, hey, if we could just get, 2 more pounds out of your household of recyclables, we'd be doing great. So then it was down to, okay, we need to tell people, do we need to do cardboard specific messaging, how to break down your cardboard, how to prepare it to make sure it goes into your recycling cart. And that was not what we found. So we went back to the basics of doing a can campaign, of basically recycle your cans. And then we did survey residents. We were like, hey, look, we're missing cans from your recycling. Why do you think we're missing cans? And we got a cross-section. It wasn't necessarily a super scientific survey, but the cross-section of answers to that was definitely interesting. And it comes down to things like missing recyclables from different parts of your house. So there's a flow in the household of getting your recyclables to the recycling container. And so that was some of the information we were looking to get. But our ultimate goal was to increase our education budget and to look at policy. So a long answer to get there. So yeah, we had multiple goals.
It's interesting. Your study was 2017 and COVID came in 2020. From the recycling curbside perspective, those of us in the collection business can tell you that the recycling of cardboard has never been higher, and it's become a huge proportion of our collections each week. You know,
Absolutely.
yeah, I mean, it's just huge now. So
Yeah.
you see a lot
And
of
if we-
prime boxes on your routes.
And I'm pretty sure we didn't have that volume of cardboard in 2017.
Yeah,
I mean, it was a
right.
growing stream for us.
Yeah.
And cardboard was that challenge, right? We had that debate, like it's a problem in a trash cart or a recycle cart when someone doesn't break it down. It just
is.
takes space.
Yeah.
We're
Yeah.
actually going back to Denver this year.
Are you?
And so, yeah, and so we're gonna see how that has changed. So that's something that, you know, you might want to think about as well. Getting, you know, long-term, you know, periodic studies like that, you can see how the stream changes and how the behavior is changing as well. So that's something, that's a new thing that the partnership is trying to do, going back to grantees we've worked with in the past to
Yeah.
see how.
Just one last thing I was thinking about relative to the collection side of this. Most of us that have been in the industry for decades have seen the need to transition to automated collection routes. And as a result, you have toters to collect, and people are very reluctant to break down boxes that are 10 by 10 or 10 by 15, which we see all the time now on our routes. So just from an educational perspective and a collection perspective, that's become a real challenge to us in the collection side of the business. And we see fewer and fewer applicants each year now. So when you think about automated routes, you go from 2 or 3 people to 1 person. But the challenge is it has to be containerized. So I'm sure you've seen that in the Denver area because I know that they're containerized there. So, yeah. Just a comment.
It goes back to, I mean, we talk a lot about it's critical to educate your customers.
Yeah.
And, you know, I always struggled with this in Denver, working in the public works department, because the city wasn't used to like outreach and education. It was a basic sort of, hey, pay your taxes, here's your bill, you know, pay your service fees, here's your bill. But this concept of like changing behavior and teaching people how to use the services, it was a hard one it's been many years of struggles, but ultimately, I mean, I think the partnership recognizes that you can give access to people and you can give them a variety of different containers, but if you're not communicating with them on a regular basis, you're not going to get the results. And that could be a cardboard campaign. How do you break down your cardboard and how do you put it in your cart? We went to that level of detail in Denver, you know, a couple of newsletters each year where we actually said, like, here's how to prepare cardboard. And so some of that, I think you'll identify with ongoing data and capture studies.
Tommy and Charlotte, there's one part of our goal is maybe a bit unique, is we want to do a portion of this capture rate study in areas that have multiple haulers, multiple routes, different days of the week. And we want to get an accurate sampling from all of those. So I'm thinking back of truck, homeowner approved type of study where you can pick up everybody's can, but still you're interfering with the hauler's customer as well. I don't know if you guys have been involved with any type of study that has those parameters involved.
Yeah, we've definitely gone with a cart-based study because of the complexity of dealing with multiple haulers that may be bringing materials to different places. Even though, you know, initially going in, we thought, you know, the goal of the study was really going to be met with a back truck sample. But yeah, just the logistics made it better for doing cart-based sampling. So after talking to Karen yesterday, it sounds like that may be an option from Louisville, and that might give you, you'll still have to, let them know that this is happening, but it might be a little bit easier to coordinate.
Very good. I'm glad you were able to speak with Karen and get a little bit more background on the different areas that we are trying to incorporate into one RFP.
And you're going to have to generate a good, you're going to have to work with your haulers to partner with them. I mean, I think you're obviously going to have public data, I would assume, out of this. So hopefully there would be that level of partnership and some sort of conversation about how to capture that material, whether you're having the contractor pick it up or if you're having them deliver it somewhere. I've always found all of the haulers in my area have always been fairly cooperative when we've tried to do some commercial studies.
I've also had a hauler kind of push back a little bit on the consultants collecting because of the fear that, residents might call in and complain, or, they might come out of their house and have an argument with the consultants or something like that. So in those cases, the haulers were willing to use their trucks or, their vehicles to help the consultants collect. And so I don't know if that might be an option if something like, if you have any concerns like that. Karen, you have a few more minutes left in your meeting. Is there anything else I can help with, to move it to the next step?
Well, I did appreciate your slides that kind of gave that list, kind of a checklist of things that we definitely will have to have in an RFP. So that I think is a good starting point. So I don't know. I mean, as far as direction from the members here, if how do we want to proceed as far as, I guess, the goal of eventually having an RFP written would be our goal here, but there's a lot of to-dos in between and a lot of decisions to make. We're talking to haulers. We have some representatives on these meetings, which is nice. But I guess just kind of understanding from Adam and the team here, if there's any guidance or anything we should definitely do over the next few weeks.
Karen, wouldn't we need approval from the board to spend a significant amount of money? I mean, we're talking about spending $100,000 to $150,000.
I think real quick, I think Brian's question was really good in that the first step is having a goal. And I still don't think that we have a clear-cut goal and what we're trying to find or determine in the capture rate study. So I think we need to start there as far as developing a goal, maybe talking to some of the haulers. Where you said you thought you were missing something. You were missing cardboard that you thought you weren't collecting. Well, how did you know that? What brought you to the idea that you were not collecting cardboard? And I would just assume that would come down to talking with the collectors, the haulers, the people like that. So I still think we need to get back to developing the goal and why are we going to develop the goal that we're going to develop. Our haulers saying that, hey, this area is terrible for recycling, or this area we constantly see cardboard. I think we're still a ways away from determining and developing what our actual goal really is.
Yeah, I would second that. And I think clarifying the goal is really important. And then also I think understanding the constraints of our budget will help us maybe narrow down within that scope what we can and can't do. And then maybe a third step, once we're further along figuring out our goals, would be to get a sense of where the granularity of the data really helps and where it actually doesn't make a difference based on case studies from other cities, so that it'll help us choose where we want those details and where we're good with passing those up.
Yeah, and I agree. I think the presentation was very helpful. I think that, like Karen said, you almost had a checklist that you need to go through to determine what you're trying to accomplish in doing this. And I just think that we still have a lot of those checklist items to determine before we're ready to put out any kind of request for quote or price. But I do think that over the last 2 to 3 meetings, all of the discussion and all of the presentations have been very, very helpful in helping and to understand what the benefits and what uh, the purpose of doing a capture rate study would be. But I just think we have a lot of a long way to go in putting something together that's going to be useful for the amount of money that may be spent to do something like that.
All right. Well, I think we obviously will need to talk to our board. And even sharing that this was our first action that we're looking at. I don't necessarily think it's so much an approval to do it because it is in the 5-year plan already. But understanding the budget, I really I have no idea. So that'll be that's one of those things I always have a hard time when you want to spend a lot of money. Do you have to know how much you have, or can you kind of like figure out like, well, you could have some tiers, like you could get this with this amount and this with this amount. I always have a hard time knowing what's the best way to do that.
Karen, I love the option of when you issue an RFP for something like this, putting in perhaps like option A, option B, option C at varying levels of detail, because I think then you're able to come back to your board and say, look, for X dollars, here's what we can get. For Y dollars, here's what we can get. And I don't think consultants, as long as you're not putting in 50 options, I think if you have a couple of reasonable options, consultants don't mind bidding those out.
Okay. And Asami, you said you'd send us that presentation. So then we'll have those slides, Adam, and I can make sure everybody gets that. And then we can maybe go through the checklist a little bit. Are there any samples? I mentioned how Vincent had sent me something before, but if there's any samples or that we could look at, or portions of it or whatever, that would be fantastic too.
Yeah, and I was also thinking, I don't know, you may have already looked at your, if you had an RFP for the 10-year study for the waste characterization portion, that might also be useful.
Okay.
To start with.
I will ask Pete about that. I wasn't here when they did that.
Yeah, but I'm happy to help along the way if you have anything you all want to talk through. I've worked with a lot of communities to plan this out, so I'm happy to be a resource.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate you being here.
Thanks for having us.
Adam, do you want to?
Yeah, I was,
close this out.
yeah. Again, I appreciate all the information today. I think it was very helpful. It's 4 o'clock. I'd go ahead and like to make a motion to end the meeting, adjourn the meeting.
Sure.
Seconded.
Approved and seconded. I think meeting adjourned. Thank you all for attending, and I think Karen will let us know when future meetings are. So I will see you all at the next meeting.
Great. Thanks, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.